The cost of running Fortnite has gone up a lot, and we're raising prices to help pay the bills. About 2 weeks ago, that is all that Epic Games told players about a price hike for their premium currency, the humble V-Buck. But it turns out they had far more brutal plans for their staff and partners. And now, 1,000 staff have just been laid off from Epic Games. That's about 20% of the company. There's $500 million in operating cost cuts on top of that. And since the story broke, we've been speaking to insiders. And we can see that the impact of this decision is going to hit far more than just Fortnite. Because we know 1,000 staff are gone from Epic. But what about the ripple effects everywhere else? And the other cuts. Turns out it really is quite rough. Epic Games just showed the world that one of the few pillars holding up the games industry, Fortnite, is in fact shaky. Right now we're approaching the end of the financial year for most companies, and that means it's usually when the big publicly listed giants start cutting staff to make their end of year reports look good. But of course, Epic Games are a private company, and in theory, they are one of the most successful companies on the planet. I mean, Fortnite prints money, right? So according to this announcement, for once, this is actually not about AI-driven efficiency. Instead, Epic freely admits they are, quote, spending significantly more than they're making, and they say that the 1,000 layoffs and $500 million in cuts to contracting, marketing, and hiring will balance out their books. And they give many reasons why. There's the same general economic situation that we've seen everyone, be it publisher or maybe just you and me, face down. And specifically for them, it means that growth and spending are both down because players have got less money, costs have went up, and the total industry player growth just has not increased as people expected. Turns out that as engaging as video games are, well, a vertical feed of videos may in fact be more engaging for many people. Now, there are other reasons as well. Epic-specific reasons, and here's what they've said about that. In being the industry's vanguard, we have taken a lot of bullets in a battle which is only in the early days of paying off for ourselves and all developers. Now, what they're referring to there is all the legal stuff. And as an example, Fortnite only just came back to Android last week, and it hit iOS again last year. And at least one of those returns is reportedly tied to an $800 million deal with Epic paying Google over 6 years. Now that came after 5 years of course, legal crusading from Epic to crowbar open the phone ecosystem. They basically wanted liberalization in storefronts and payment providers, of course specifically so that they can launch their own store and do the payment providing themselves. That of course means a better revenue share. They absolutely succeeded on that. And as much as they stand to benefit from that, many of the rest of us do as well. Some of that legal crowbarring is probably good, but for them, it's been absolutely a Pyrrhic victory. Because all that money they weren't collecting during all that time, could have paid for developers. Back in January of 2025, Tim Sweeney told IGN that they could afford to fight Apple and Google for decades. So, obviously something changed. He was not anticipating these layoffs. The company clearly projected that they would be making more money by this point, but they're obviously not. The money's not coming in, meaning that Epic are cutting their spending, so let's talk about those cuts. First, you need to know that all this follows the 2023 layoffs, which were 830 employees, about 16% of the company, and the divestment of Bandcamp. Yeah, I don't think Bandcamp was ever going to save their finances. Now, back then the reasons given were that creator content profit margins weren't high enough, and the company was spending too much, and that 2/3 of costs sat outside of their core development teams. And now, well, cuts are happening again. So here's what's happening. The peripheral game modes like Rocket Racing, Ballistic, and Festival Battle Stage are all being sunset, though in each case the tools and systems will be released into UEFN for player creation, which honestly is a fairly good thing. Normally in video games that would just all go into the bin. That would be that. It going to the community is actually a little bit of a silver lining, and as much as it's not going to be great for those staff, maybe it is nice that at least some of their work does get to live on and get into the hands of players. Outside of Fortnite, games like Horizon Chase and its enhanced version, Horizon Chase Turbo, have suddenly been announced for delisting. Basically, their developer is owned by Epic. So what we see is that experimentation and some degrees of ongoing support are basically over, and even the incoming free-to-play version of Save the World, originally a paid mode, is an attempt to get more money from a game that frequently rivals the top 100 of Steam. So you can basically see that Epic is looking at their worst performing official modes, they're cutting them loose over to the community, and they are laying off the devs who worked on them. Oh, but they're not stopping there. Experienced staff are being cut, like, say, principal engineers who have been there since 2017, and even a director of character art who created Fortnite's most famous characters. And you gotta think, for a game monetized like Fortnite, I mean, character art really does seem like it's something that helps the bottom line. And when you think about that, and then see Tim Sweeney posting about how the fired staff are in the, quote, top few percent of the discipline, you really see how bad this would appear to be. I mean, Sweeney is absolutely projecting. These are brilliant people, you should absolutely hire them. This is an unprecedented wave of talent that I have graciously injected into the labor market. But obviously implicit in that is that if these are the top percent, then they're really not the sort of people you want to lose in your company. So that does suggest that their basic economics are kinda fucked. But what we've talked about so far, the cuts to modes and staff, only tell you part of the story. Because underneath all of this, there is a question about Fortnite itself, how it hasn't grown, and how Epic just did not plan for the money printer to finally slow down. If Fortnite is succeeding, then Epic can afford huge legal crusades, they can afford to expand, afford to experiment. But in 2025, Fortnite was not succeeding. Player numbers were wildly variable all of that year. The 0-hour crossover event in November pulled in more than 10 million people, but that was the exception. People kind of swung between being thrilled at new modes like Blitz Royale and the Simpsons crossover, which was by all accounts loved, but then bored to tears by the drawn-out Star Wars season, fronted by, of course, Gen AI Vader. This stuff doesn't mean that Fortnite is actively collapsing. Circana analyst Matt Piscatella points out that in the US last month, 35% of players in PlayStation played Fortnite for 16 hours on average, while 31% of Xbox players played it for 15 hours. That's a lot of people Fortniting. I mean, a third of the install base is playing this game, which really is a worrying thing. I mean, if success this hard is not really financially sustainable, oh dear, is this entire thing built on sand? In a way, maybe. You see, the problem is that last February, those averages were 21 and 19 hours. So the time is actually going down. And when your entire business model runs on engagement driving spending, losing 4 to 5 hours per player per month is a serious hit to your revenue. And in Epic's year in review, they said the total gameplay declined to only 6.65 billion hours. That's a lot of hours, but it's in the wrong direction, and leadership's response was to squeeze harder. But the thing is, the crossovers alone were not enough, and some of the crossovers were actually loved, like the Simpsons one. In November 2025, Fortnite started to look a little bit more like Roblox. That's because, on top of existing engagement payouts, individual island servers could start selling microtransactions paid for in premium currency. Now, it was a 100% revenue split for the first months, and then 50% to Epic after February. Seems like a good way to make money, but it just didn't move the needle. So a month later, the price of V-Bucks went up, with all bonus currency from the battle passes being eliminated. That's quite brutal. Now, players understandably didn't see how that was their problem and, responded with outrage, especially given a perceived drop in core seasonal content quality over the last few months. Now, obviously, this isn't a case of people saying, we hiked the prices, you guys should have really paid attention to that and actually jumped on top of it and just bought loads of shit so that you could protect our staff. Obviously, no one really thinks that. I don't think Tim Sweeney thinks that. These layoffs are not the fault of players, but I think they're also not really the fault of developers either. You see, Fortnite was always going to stop making as much money as it has been eventually. It's a decade old. It's an old game. Soon they will be calling Fortnite a boomer game. Don't we all feel old? No, the real question here is what the people running Fortnite did to prepare for this eventuality, and the answer starts with what was happening behind the scenes months before this announcement. So we spoke to a source who worked as an external QA contractor on Fortnite in North America, and we've learned that Epic has actually been cutting for months. We just haven't been able to see it. Stretching as far back as October, contract staff levels have been cut at very short notice, or Epic has tried to negotiate for the same level of support, but of course at a much cheaper deal to themselves. And from our source's perspective, the workload has not dropped even as staff numbers have absolutely dropped. Well-supported external teams like these are the sorts of ones that you never really hear about, but they are vital to shipping live service games. Now, Fortnite's most recent major update shipped buggy and late, and that was before the $500 million in cuts to contracting and support that they just announced. And this is perhaps the most dangerous part of these layoffs. Okay, systemic impacts. So 1,000 more developers across the globe will join the thousands already laid off this year, and the tens of thousands laid off over the last 5 years. Each of those former employees will have a wealth of experience, but obviously finding new roles in 2026 is incredibly difficult, especially because they're now all competing with each other. And those are just the staff directly impacted. Any contracts with external developers, support teams, or QA impacted by the $500 million in cuts, that's a lot of money, and of course there are cuts leading up to that, well, those can also lead to layoffs at those companies, ones that you probably won't hear about, as all of these companies scramble to find replacement revenue for what previously would have been seen as a fairly safe deal on a big industry titan of a game. And beyond that, this is Epic Games. One of the biggest game companies on the planet is making layoffs like this, and they're openly admitting that they're not making enough money. Here, it doesn't matter that Epic themselves are a private company. The point is that if Epic, sitting on Fortnite, sitting on the Unreal Engine, can't make their numbers work, well, what does that tell every investor evaluating new deals in the gaming industry right now? I think it tells them the floor may be lower than anyone thought. And maybe the sorts of projects many of those groups were into funding, the big, exciting live services that would just promise continual, stable revenue month after month after month, year after year, not the traditional game revenue of, oh, in 3 years we'll have a game done and maybe it'll make a lot of money, maybe it won't. Who knows? It's art. No, there's a reason why they all wanted to fund live services. When they work, live services generate revenue in a way that is absolutely fantastic for a corporation. So when we see a story like this one happen, there is a real risk of making a difficult funding situation far worse, and at the exact moment that studios actually do need investment the most. But the thing is, it almost certainly didn't have to be this way. So far, while many directors in Fortnite are getting yoked out the door, we haven't seen anyone from the executive team take a hit. Of course, those people are the key decision makers here, and here what we see is that the people making Fortnite have been making Fortnite, but the people leading Epic? Well, they've been using Fortnite to fund endless dream projects, making the game a platform for creators, deals with Unity to make all games run in Fortnite, deals with Disney to make it the future of marketing. 3 years ago, they overextended and they had to cut back. And now, at least 1,000 people are losing their jobs because the same leadership basically made the same bet again and lost again. It doesn't seem like they've learned much, and there don't seem to be many consequences for them. And look, this isn't just an Epic Games problem. This is absolutely everywhere. We've seen it across just about all of the big top companies with huge teams placing these huge bets and then really finding an awful win rate for those bets. So I think this might mean it's time for us to reevaluate where this industry's going and what sort of games it's actually focusing on, because it does not seem to be sustainable. The AA scale game is barely a thing anymore. Live services have basically eaten the top, and in trying to outspend and outmake Fortnite, the industry's done untold damage to itself, probably incalculable damage to itself. It's a total disaster, but in my view, it's not a surprising one. For a long time, we have not been paying money for video games. For a long time, we've been paying money for upcharges within video games. And I have a little feeling that the further the economics get away from being driven by developers making content, the worse things will be. Because why have a healthy stable of appropriately scoped games all targeting diverse audiences who are going to get a game made for them? Why have that when you can just make huge mono games to target every human on the planet? Doesn't really make sense, does it? And all through the research, writing, recording stages, etc. of this video, there were more layoffs at more companies. Studios shut down. We'll talk about that soon, but suffice to say, stuff is not looking good. But do you know who has got their job back in a really funny way, the Subnautica guys, and the Krafton CEO, who basically said, "Hello there, ChatGPT. I would like to get out of a $250 million contract. Please help." Turns out that was a bad idea, and you can learn all about it in the next video.